I think a relationship with awareness and is a huge thing. If, for instance, I raise my arm over my head and it's bent, and I know it's bent, I'm in a deeper yogic practice than the flexible person who can raise their arm overhead straight but doesn't really know where their arm is in space. They just have the capacity to put their arm in that position. But to me, getting the arm straight is really a fairly meaningless proposition. I mean, like it's just your arm and it's straight or it's bent. But if I've traversed some sort of inner territory where I didn't know my arm was actually bent and I didn't know how to straighten it, and I've traversed an inner territory that now I know that it's bent, now I know what's tight and restricting it, now I know how to activate what's weak and how to mobilize what's tight, and within a period of time, be it one class or 4 years, my arm goes from an unconscious bent position to a conscious bent position to a consciously straight position. That is the arm reflecting an inner process. It's not that we changed the arm. We integrated something between the ability to be present, aware, and in relationship with the body, and bringing the awareness into the body over time. That is what the yoga is, not the arm being straight.
My conversation with Christina Sell explores the practice of yoga beyond the physical postures and poses known as asanas, where yoga can serve as a vehicle and modality for all manner of self-exploration and awareness. Christina is an international yoga teacher and draws inspiration from many master teachers in Iyengar Yoga, Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga, Anusara Yoga, and Bikram Yoga. She believes that yoga practice can help anyone access their inner wisdom and their authentic spirituality, and can also help clarify their highest personal expression. Christina Sell is the founder and director of her own yoga school near Austin, Texas, and has produced an impressive collection of online programs, webinars, and trainings. She is also the author of 2 books, Yoga from the Inside Out, Making Peace with Your Body Through Yoga, and My Body is a Temple, Yoga as a Path to Wholeness. What I found most intriguing about Christina's work is that she has an inspiring, earnest, and yet delightfully humorous way of synthesizing asana practice with philosophy, spirituality, and her own years of direct experience and a life of purposeful self-exploration. I'm Chess Edwards, and this is Beyond the Noise, conversations at the heart of modern-day living. I interviewed Christina Sell in April of 2015. So hello, Christina.
Hello, Chess. Happy to be here.
Thank you. I really appreciate you being here this afternoon. How I got a hold of you was I reached out to a dear friend of mine who's got a very strong yoga practice up in Los Angeles. And I asked her for, who are some of the teachers that you really respect and admire and you think are doing really good work, not just around the asanas of yoga, but really exploring yoga from a variety of different perspectives and through different lenses. And she pointed me in the direction of you. And I visited your website, and I was just really turned on by your blogs and what you're talking about, and your curiosity to explore a lot of different kind of edges.
Well, that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah. And one of the things I found from your website is that you're speaking about, you've got online programs, you've got, you work with your students directly. I know you've got a studio there right on your property, and you still travel and teach. And on your website, it says that your programs are an engaging synthesis of asana, philosophy, and direct experience, all aimed at helping you access your inner wisdom and to live the light of yoga. And I thought we might start with, I'm curious, to live the light of yoga. What does that mean to you?
Wow. Well, to me, that's actually, I think about each person, some of it's got a reference to some of the old teachings of yoga that referenced the deepest part of who we are with the metaphors of light. in the teachings of yoga, it's also referenced with metaphors of sound, so kind of depends on which doorway you go into and which philosophical stream you orient yourself around. But you're going to run up against these essential being referenced at some essential fundamental way, like through sound, through light. And so the heart, the deepest spiritual heart, is sometimes described as a light, and the individual person is sometimes described as a divine spark from the flame that we all are part of. And so I think of it also like that, from the philosophical streams, but also in a very practical way. We might say when someone's really excited, like you said, you were really lit up. When we say, oh my God, they were just so shiny and bright, or they were bright-eyed, or we say, oh, the light of awareness, or
Yeah.
or you shed light on something. All of these are in some ways metaphors, to say that's light. I would say that in a sense, we're using, it's language, and there's limitations in language. So sometimes we speak about the inner light, and I don't close my eyes and see like a blazing fireworks display of like light, light of yoga, It's not like that for me. It's more like that place in yoga that, we have a word in Sanskrit called tejas, and it means the spiritual light. And these are the ways that it manifests, in the light in the eyes, or the sort of enthusiasm of spirit, or an idea takes hold of us and it sparks an interest. These are, again, sort of fire and light metaphors. And so to live the light of yoga to me is really to live in remembrance of a kind of inner light of awareness that's inside. And using it as to say the light of yoga, I would say that yoga would be very broadly defined it that way. I think you would say, in the Christian traditions, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. So I think we're going to see that metaphor of light throughout traditions and throughout philosophical streams, and even throughout disciplines, when we talk about something awakening from within, something dawning from within. And we have it certainly in nature. Every morning the sun rises, and we need a right amount of sun for things to grow, and the right amount of light for us to be able to see our way. So to me, it's very broad in that way when I think about the light of yoga.
Well, I really appreciate the reference to the essence of it, the feeling of it. When you were, I always like to start these interviews by looking at your sense of knowing what you know now, of who you are and how you feel into your work and what's important to you and what resonates with you. If you look back at your youth, whether really young childhood or anywhere back in your youth, do you see Christina? Can you look back and see that young self and see that there was a part of you who was really pretty much destined to do this type of work because it was already alive in you in some way, in your nature as a child?
Well, I'd have to say yes, and yet the path is pretty circuitous. One of the things I actually am appreciating about getting older is getting more and more of a bird's eye view of my own life's experience. So that I think, a lot of times, I think of life like it really is a movie, and it's not a freezed frame. If we freeze the frame at any given moment in our life, or let's say you ask the question about my life, you could have frozen the frame at any given moment, and you would have found me suffering with bulimia. You could have freezed the frame at any moment, and I was in some pretty negative patterns in my relationship with men. And you could freeze the pattern and say, oh, there's a period of time I couldn't hold down a job. So you could freeze the frame at any given point. And nowhere on the site that would you say, oh yeah, destiny, that I'd be writing on matters of transformation.
Right.
It's like some of those dark nights of the soul.
And there are some through threads though. Yes. So we freeze the frame, and there's this and that period, and I find that if we look, there's like, but there's been some things that have really stayed with me. I've wandered from them, but they were kind of a central thread.
Well, I think that's it. I really have always enjoyed, I think, a sense of enthusiasm for life and a sense of curiosity. And there's, I would say, pretty much always been a time where I've always been interested in the way things are and the way things work and what lives beneath the surface. So even though there's a enthusiastic, lighthearted quality to my personality, I'm actually someone who doesn't very easily like sit at the shallow end of the pool. You know, it's kind of in this other way a very serious kid, and I'm the person at a party. My job is very extroverted. For instance, I stand in front of rooms of people and I talk a lot. And but if you find me at a party, you're going to find me in a corner talking very seriously to one person at a time about something. And and I've really always been that way. And I've kept a journal since I was a very small child. And my dad handed me one, like I think about, I must have been 8 or 9, and said, "Well, write it as you see it." And
Oh, cool. Your dad gave you a journal.
yes, I come from a family of readers and writers and kind of seriously minded thinkers, and that has a lot of ups and a lot of downs within those
Sure.
seeds. But definitely, I would say that's been a big thread. And so the vantage point now, I'm 46 years old, and looking back and to say, oh yeah, this is actually even those dark moments that I mentioned earlier. It's very clear to say, oh, well, that period of time where I struggled with those different issues, oh, that yielded so much insight. That
Mm.
really has fueled so much compassion. That made it so that I looked deeper into this area, and this helped me shore this other area up. So I kind of see like there's a lot of what I've been through, both positive and negative, have contributed to the work that I do today and who I am today. So I wouldn't say I suppose to your answer, yeah, I think it's while the path was circuitous, it was really, you never really off path either.
Mm. Yeah, and I love it. We hear the train in the background, right?
Yeah,
It's on a track, and we often wish our lives could do that. But then, what I love what you're saying is we're so glad that they don't.
right,
That we do go off the tracks, because that's where we really learn and explore into areas where we may not have had the natural courage to go. So life took us there so that we could really learn some of the things that we may not have chosen to learn on our own.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the school of direct experience.
Yes, exactly, which we can't quite avoid, can we? Um, I was reading through some of your blogs, and I see that you've really started your practice in 1991. So it's been 24 years or so. And you said that you were living in Hippieville. What, was it really Hippieville, California, or
I
because it very well could be?
no,
The
I was living in Garberville, California, which is way up north, and at a holistic health and intentional community and massage school. So it was up in Garberville, which is, I think, kind of like a hippie haven as it is, or at least
yeah.
it was back then. And this was sort of a annexed area of Hippieville. So,
I think it still is Hippieville. It just has more technology now.
yeah, right.
What?
So, yeah, I was working in Oregon, and was in a relationship with someone I was certain I was going to get married to, and a big love of my life at the time, right out of college. And then he broke up with me, and I was devastated. So I packed my Toyota pickup truck, or whatever it was I was driving at the time. I think it might have actually been a Dodge Raider. And I think the pickup truck came later after the Raider broke down. But anyway, I got in the car and went down the California coast and pulled over for lunch at Hartwood Institute, thinking maybe I would go to school there, or I don't
Mm.
know. I'd always heard about it because I was in Hippieville, Arizona before that. And anyway, I stopped off for lunch, and they actually offered me a job, and I stayed there for a while, and it was a good kind of safe place to land in a tumultuous inner time. But that's where I was introduced to yoga asana. Yeah.
And I'm curious about in reading, you were taking classes, and I think you were saying that only like 2 classes a week were available, and you were asking, what if I wanted to take more? And so you were given books with big pictures, and you were able to continue your practice, and you kept coming back. You kept coming back, and it was clear that there was a real resonance there, that it was something was happening that you were really finding an alignment or resonance with, or at least that's what I was reading into. What kept you coming back to the practice, whereas some other people, enter into it and really have a bumpy ride, kind of staying with it, but you kept coming back.
I guess that part, I was going through a breakup with a pretty serious relationship, and
Mm.
so that was right after college. So I was, I don't know, 21 or 22, and um, but I went into treatment at 18 for my eating disorder and for depression, and I spent 18 months in a residential program and was introduced to all kinds of self inquiry processes, a lot of cathartic. Emotional work and a lot of group dynamic processes and backpacking and all kinds of things at a young age. And even prior to that, I was always interested in the inner life. I mean, it was kind of thwarted through drugs, alcohol, bulimia, and adolescence.
Right.
But when I got into asana, some people say that they ask like how I got into the philosophy of it, and I was already into inner work by the time asana came along, and I liked exercise. I mean, it wasn't a big leap for me at all. It was a very sort of natural thing, and yet it wasn't an all at once process either. I didn't develop a practice that I would say was really consistent right away. I just sort of came back and forth. It kind of would keep pulling me back. So to me, I don't, I, and it was so different at that time because nowadays yoga is everywhere, and I think that's kind of awesome in a lot of ways. It's very easily accessible. It's besides just books and videos and the online world, and then every yoga studio, every corner in Austin, Texas, for instance, has a yoga studio on it. And I go to cities, and they're just more and more
Mm.
everywhere. So it's very easy to get going and to go to yoga classes now. And it wasn't like that. And the upside of it now is very available. People have a very rich community experience in yoga. Um, and that's kind of neat. For me, it was always a sort of personal, private thing. I went to class a couple times a week and learned a little bit, and I practiced a little bit on my own. But it was a I would just say just like a seed that got planted, and I watered it some years more than others.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. And I really appreciate, you referencing that, it wasn't the aha, angel singing moment of, oh my God, this is it. I've taken a couple of yoga classes and I have found my calling in the world.
And I watch a lot of people who report that. I just don't see them after about 3 to 5 years.
Mm.
I kind of like am very interested in as a yoga teacher. I taught students for years in public classes. I was always very interested in the person who was regularly there twice a week, and instead of the person who'd had the religious conversion experience and like was there every day for of a week, 2 and 3 classes a week. I was like, I won't see them in a year. You know.
Well, it does. Yeah, it has that flavor, or can have that flavor, I think, of like, okay, this is the thing I'm going to latch on to now. That's going to
Right.
save me, that's going
Yeah.
to change me and transform me, and rather than the person who's just taking it as, oh yes, here's a practice that I can engage in, and let's see what happens with this.
Right.
Hmm. I was watching one of your interviews, a video, and I really appreciated, and it seems we're kind of starting to talk about it. Is I like how you really seem to welcome all the different relationships that people can have to yoga. And one of the ways you wrote about it was that people walk in through different doorways and that every entry point is valid.
Hmm.
Everyone's going to have a different experience and everyone's going to find a different relationship with the practice.
Yeah, I mean that seems pretty obvious to me. I noticed that over the years, one of the things I've noticed about people in general is some people really love a sense of difference, and some people love a sense of similarity. I remember when I was in college and we were on a orientation trip. One of the things we did in freshman orientation at the college I went to was a 21-day backpacking trip.
You went
So
to Prescott
I
College,
went to
didn't
Prescott
you?
College.
I did too.
You did?
I did.
I
So
didn't
as soon
know
as somebody
you did.
says that, it's like, oh, I know what college you went to.
Okay, so I remember we were out on one of our nights out in the desert in Arizona, and we are talking, and people around the campfire, or I don't even know if it was a fire because we were out in the desert. So anyway, around the circle, were saying how amazing it was that everyone was just could get along so well, and everyone was so different, and everyone was so different. And I remember reflecting at that time that the people just loved that everyone was so different, and I never really liked that things were different. I always was looking, I was someone who liked to find the ways that we were the same. And I think I grew up in my family like feeling like such a black sheep and feeling so different, and it wasn't a good thing, that I don't really think to myself, oh, right away, difference is totally awesome to be different, you know?
Look how many ways I don't fit in.
Yes, exactly. I think that's like such a, tender, wounded place from my childhood, that I'm always like, this is the way we're the same, and that I've always felt more reassured by finding similarity. And so for me, that discussion, what I have had to train myself to see, and through some hard knocks as a teacher and a facilitator, is really how different we actually are. And that's come to mean something different to me than it did as a child of not fitting in. To see that at a personality level, we're really quite different in terms of being organized, whether it's introversion or extroverted, or through the senses or through the thought patterns, and just how we go through the world. And I've had to, in my search for the ways that we're the same and wanting to bond around similarity, I really I missed or made some mistakes as a teacher in not recognizing that we really are different, and people are coming to the practice for different ways. And what's inspiring for me isn't inspiring for somebody else, and what sustains me may not sustain somebody else. And over the course of teaching, I got started teaching asana in 1998. And so that's almost 20 years now, 18 years, I guess. That has just been such an important shift in my own understanding to recognize difference as a positive thing, and to validate it in myself, to validate it in others, and to remember that in my teaching. And it's not better or less or worse. And some people come by that more naturally. They have a search for similarity, I suppose.
Right.
But
well, and I hear you saying, that really did come from, some of the childhood experiences. And so that was it the desire to, early on, to be included.
Sure.
Yeah, I could see you sitting around that circle going, wait a minute, no.
Wait a minute, but we're the same. Look at what we're all interested in,
One of the things you mentioned in your writing is you said I have to say it has taken me 17 years, maybe you wrote this a year ago. I have to say it has taken me 17 years to feel mature enough to teach well. And you're writing about how often, yoga teachers, really start teaching too soon, and that's hard to avoid. It's just kind of part of what needs to happen. I think it happens with almost every profession, right? That we enter in oftentimes before we're fully ready, because to get fully ready, we have to be doing the work.
Right. Don't they say that about parenting too? You're really never ready to be a parent.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a parent, but my friends who are parents say that, and it's like you can't ever have all of our ducks in a row, because there's the theory of it, and then there's the practice of it, and the direct experience of it. And so it's kind of like, wow, yeah, wouldn't it be great to go back and redo earlier aspects of our life now that we know what we know,
Yeah, wouldn't that, or not, right?
Yeah,
or not.
Or like, I just wouldn't get as bogged down in certain things that were so troublesome. But the only reason I have that perspective is because I walked through it, got bogged down, find my way out of it, and so I think it's just built into the machine of it. And I think that probably in 10 years, if it all keeps going well, I'll look back at this time and hopefully look back and say, oh, so many more things came to into a more mature relationship within me relative to my work. That's what I hope for. Is I don't think that I did a lot of harm in those earlier days. I made my mistakes, and I've made certain amends. I mean, there was harm. I'm not saying I'm then some
right. I was going to say there was that one student.
Well, there's more than one. My God, there's more than one. But
yeah.
One of the chants, that we sing in the a lot of times before trainings and classes, it's from the Upanishads, and one of the lines is, "May we be free of the seeds of enmity or hatred for one another." So you have this several thousand-year-old chant that goes back to the Upanishads, some of the earliest texts in yoga, and it's sung between teachers and students when they embark upon study together. And one of the things that I take a lot of comfort in is that I don't know, thousands of years ago, teachers and students recognized that it's difficult to explore the teachings and to go through a transformational process together and remain free of hatred. It's very difficult when the process of transformation gets heated for us to remember that so much of that work is internal and not to project it outwards. So chances are, if you're really in any kind of role as a helper, that's going to get dicey. We're going to all have mistakes that we've made and feelings that we have hurt and times we've been hurt. So I certainly have made a lot of mistakes, but I would say probably even looking back on the times when I feel like, oh yeah, I wasn't really mature enough. I had no business teaching. I was still helping people. I made mistakes, but I was still of use and I was still of service. And I look back at each, kind of 10-year, maybe 5-year increments and go, oh, well, that really happened by 5 years or another 5 years. Oh, I could really, and what I think when I was writing that about 17 years, I think it's taken me close to that long to be less self-centered in it, to be able to be a little bit more free of myself and more able to see the students in the ways that they're different and the ways that their needs are theirs and not so sort of codependently enmeshed with my own.
Yeah, that to give ourselves that permission to know
Yeah,
that we're going to make mistakes going in.
right.
Do you know Ira Glass?
Sure,
Yeah, so
sure.
he This American Life, and he's got a beautiful little video online, and it's just him speaking, narrating, and then while he's narrating, there's the words he's saying are being scribbled across the screen. It's really cool, and what he's saying is that when we start anything, our taste, what we envision happening, far outweighs our skills.
Mm-hmm.
And that we have to jump in. We have to be prolific. We just have to do the work so that our skills actually start to come back up into an alignment with our taste, with what we know we want to create. Um, you you are also saying that there are things that, as a teacher, there are things that we need to get good with. And it sounds like one of them, at least for you, is getting good with the idea that people are different and they have different ways of being in the practice and different outcomes and experiences in it. Does anything else come to mind for you now when you think about, what else do teachers really need to get good with in order to allow themselves to mature in their practice?
There is an incredibly empowering and wonderful thing that happens in the learning process. But what happens many times before that is demoralizing and frustrating. And so it seems to me like there's a little bit of an ebb and flow, like the brilliant inspiration to learn a subject, like I want to fill in the blank, the student comes with this sort of, and that's a very heightened state. I think that's a very wonderful, precious state of light in a sense. There's a spark of an idea, inspiration to do something, a vision of, I remember the first time I went surfing and I, in my mind, wanted to be surfing the wave. And I've learned a lot of different things over the years. So it was a little like, once again, to be reminded of like, I did not envision that I'd spend so much time just learning to get up on the board or be
Underwater.
underwater, dodging, trying not to get hit by my board and feeling like totally inept and incapable and uncoordinated. And that was nowhere in sight in my inspiration to surf.
Mm.
So the inspiration to learn something that we come with when we're the student, or if we're teachers and our students come in the door with, it's a very precious thing, and it's very oftentimes high-minded and can be quite big. But then the reality of learning, it is a tough process. And so I think that I think there's some edge there as a teacher to get good with the fact that our students will be going through a very uncomfortable and sometimes demoralizing process, and that is their process. So some things that I have to get good with about that is that can't be bypassed, in a sense that there is a very real way that the working through the difficulty to build the skill set builds the muscles to be able to do the thing well, whatever that thing is. whether it's writing. Everybody talks about it. Every creative process talks about that stage.
Yeah, you just got
And
to keep showing up.
uh-huh. And I've been, just because it's the nature of mastery is
Hmm.
those 10,000 hours.
Yes, yes.
And they're not 10,000 hours generally of, I don't think, of like bliss and enjoyment. And so I think that as a teacher, that's something to get good with, to know that the process the student's undergoing, we can't spare them from that. We don't have to make it worse than it is. Certainly, we can be a great supportive guide, but a certain measure of frustration is inherent in the process. Um, and I think that gets tricky, especially in this day and age as yoga teachers, for instance, when the teaching process is also linked to people's income. So when you're getting paid because for someone to come back because they liked your class, it's very tempting to keep the difficulties
Hmm.
as far away as possible so that the student isn't faced with something demoralizing, because who wants to pay $10, $15 every week to come back to a class that's demoralizing?
Right. Does that become part of the teaching?
I think so. I think there needs to be an education process around, like, there's some fine print here, and I don't think we ever want to set anybody up for failure or set anybody up for unnecessary frustration.
Right.
But the process of I think developing a practice and developing a relationship with ourselves is through a subject. It takes a long time, and it's got some rough spots. So I think that that's a big thing to get used to.
I think that's beautiful. I mean, to have a teacher say up front of any discipline, right, of anything that you want
Mhm.
to master, to say up front, let's not kid ourselves from day one. There are days that this is going to suck.
Mhm.
When I work with my coaching clients, we talk about how there's going to be days where we end a session really weird.
Right.
It's going to be jagged. It's going to be edgy. The times, it's like the therapist. Okay, our time is up. And
Yeah.
then it's like, wait a minute. I just got really raw and vulnerable, and it's like, yeah. So
Well,
go be with that for a week, and let's
right.
talk about that. Um, you and I were talking earlier about this interview and what we might talk about. One of the things you brought up that I just loved was the idea that how we do anything is how we do everything, and that you were saying that you can be a student of yoga, you can be a student of a teacher, and you can also be a student of yourself. Am I a receptive student? And what does that look like? So I'm curious, as a student of ourselves, for yourself, what have you found to be a student of yourself through the practice, and in seeing the people around you? Um, what does that look like to be a student of ourselves?
I think that in some ways, like, the teacher in the yoga tradition wasn't really there to be, but was there largely to be pointing the student to the student's wisdom. So I think that ultimately, in a higher sense, we're not looking at different things. We're looking at different doorways toward the same understanding, and that in some ways the inner wisdom of the student is in a checks and balances relationship with the outer teachings. It sounds a little bit vague, but having one of the things I notice is, kind of as a teacher and as a student, there seems to be sort of two types of student, and one is like, tell me what to do, and I'll just do what you say.
Yes, right.
And then there's the student who's like, you're not the boss of me. I'm going to figure it out myself. And a little bit of both is usually kind of helpful,
Mm,
like, and so that's what I kind of mean by even knowing our temperament, knowing our basic temperament. And I walk in the door, am I the type of person that will lose myself and almost too easily yield my own inner authority and do what's asked of me? Or am I the type of person that in some ways withholds a kind of vulnerability of studentship and is in some ways unhelpable by an outside force? Um, and I think that there is long, long, long histories in probably every transformational tradition of, of people yielding their own inner authority to the wrong outer authority. We can just do a search online for cults gone wrong, and my God, they're everywhere, you know.
Yes, exactly.
So we don't even just see that in the quirky new agey stuff. We see that in the in the more traditional streams of religion and
It's
abuses of
always
power.
been happening.
Right,
Right.
right. So as I come to understand this more and more in my own life, that is that I have to know my own tendency to start with. And how do I usually, many times, the only way we get to know our tendency is because we make a mistake to the other extreme. You know, we make a mistake with it or sometimes. So that's one way. Um, but like if I come into, let's see, let's kind of get specific. But if I'm thinking about like teachings in yoga, for instance, about some of them are kind of big, you know, like, okay, non-harming, you know.
Right. Right. Well, and I want to remind you, one of the quotes you used is yoga is an empowering ass kicking.
Right. Yeah, you know, so okay, let's try to live with non-harming, you know, like okay, so then I have to study the outer teaching. What are the greats of this tradition saying about non-harming? And then I have to study my own life and see like ways am I harming others? Am I harming in my own harmful in my own thoughts and behaviors towards myself? Do I even think I'd like, think harming thoughts towards others? I start to be a student of my own life and my own experience about where that concept even, how it might be playing out inside of me. And then ultimately, though, I do think there has to be a way that gets put into practice that is resonant to who we are and not just a prescribed protocol from the outside. So that's kind of why I think that they're all kind of like offering these different checks and balances to one another. Somewhere along the line, someone talked about non-harming, and I had to read up on it, and I had to take some outer teachings in and follow some suggestions from the outside to even learn about the concept. That's the outer teaching, and yet at the same time, when I start to look at how it is to be in a relationship to that inside myself, it becomes very complex. How far down the road do you really go with non-harming? You know, like
Right. Right.
do you cover up your mouth, you know, so you don't breathe in an insect? I mean, like what's at stake here with the non-harming? And I think that whole big process between, and that's just one little topic in the tradition of yoga to consider, and it could go all the way down to like a teacher saying in an asana class, straighten your legs. Well, that opens up a whole other door. Like, how do you actually get them straight if they're tight and you can't? How do you know what they mean for you? And I think that there's we're going to fall off the razor's edge of this one way or the other. Either and that's to me like that middle road is really this sifting through it into some kind of inner discernment. That is what the real studentship is about, not just doing the protocols by the book so that we're like good yogis and not just throwing them out in the name of wild independence. I'm doing my own thing, but like, where is the place of a discerned resonance?
It's such a practice of presence. And I find it different than the practice, my meditation practice, which is my meditation practice it has a lot more history and commitment from me. And I've only just gotten back into my yoga practice. And I'm really digging on the fact that it gives me the opportunity to, at 2 months in, having the dialogue with myself around, my hips still not open and my thighs are still like steel bands and okay, so what do I do with that? I have all sorts of opportunities for self-love and compassion or heavy judgment or impatience. I mean, it gives me the opportunity to choose between all sorts of states of being, in the present moment.
And I think that really is, to me, the conversation of asana practice that's most interesting. Over the long haul, like I think that inner inquiry, and I'm kind of laughing that even the use of words and how they would have changed is, from a more traditional yoga standpoint, if you've been meditating for the last 20 years, you've been doing yoga all along and you've just gotten back into asana. So asanas, like
Yes, that resonates. That I like that.
So I think Now in America, in American culture, we say yoga to me and the asana practice. And it's a small little doorway into it's one small little avenue. It's wonderful. It's rich. It does amazing things. But so many of the promises of the yoga tradition weren't asana-based promises. They were meditation promises.
Yes. Yeah.
So the meditator's mind and that deep awareness of presence of that process that you were describing, I think it's an advantage in asana practice to have that presence of mind is much more of an advantage than just having strength or flexibility in the body. Because at some point, this year or next or at the end of our life, we're not going to be able to bend and stretch and touch our toes in the same way, and so I think that discerning awareness where we're saying to ourselves, the asana to me isn't about the asana as much as it's about the inquiry, the opportunity for inquiry, and the opportunity for the choice of what kind of relationship we're going to build for ourselves in the physical vehicle and through it.
You can listen again and share this show and all the Beyond the Noise episodes at our website, beyondthenoisepodcast.com. For many who are unfamiliar with yoga, and even for many who are familiar with it, yoga can be seen through the narrow perspective of only being about the asanas, the physical postures and poses of yoga, and as a tool for the betterment of our physical, mental, and even emotional wellness. But Christina Sell helps us to see that there is an even richer experience available if we can see the full arc of yoga across time, from the traditional and ancient teachings to the modern-day perspectives and applications. When seen from this broader perspective, we find that yoga isn't just about nailing great body positions. It can be a powerful tool in our own personal growth and development. I'm Chess Edwards, and this is Beyond the Noise, conversations at the heart of modern-day living. And here's the other thing. Everyone who practices yoga knows this, so I guess I'm saying this to anyone listening who doesn't practice yoga. I got back into the practice. Yoga is really hard. It has this essence of looking at it from the outside of flow and grace and ease and look at that, we're opening up, and isn't that wonderful? Holy cow, it's some of the hardest work I've ever done. And so some of the hardest work I've done in regards to the physicality of it really is an amazing opportunity to be present with, okay, how do I face things that are really, really hard for me?
I think that's it. I mean, therein lies its value to us, in a sense that it's difficult. I mean, I think that there's also, when we start talking about, in the same way that we talk about meditation, there's many, many styles of meditation and different techniques that would all qualify as meditation. So if someone says they practice meditation, it could mean anything from observing their breath to labeling their thoughts as they arise to mantra-based meditation.
Yes,
I mean, it's
yes.
such a broad spectrum of what we would say qualifies as meditation. And also when we talk about asana practice, I think that there's a broad spectrum. If you try to get yoga teachers to agree on what it is, man, it's like herding cats. We do not agree. And big fights, systems to systems and tradition to tradition around the asana practice. And there's a lot of difference from, but when we start to trace some of its roots, talk about like the ha and the tha, the sun and the moon channels, that's sort of esoteric meaning of hatha yoga, but it also means to force or to strike. And it implied a supreme effort of will being applied to the physical body and to the structural, energetic body to create a transformational change. It wasn't this sort of groovy, kind of smooth thing, sort of full of like nice chanting and swooning, I mean, really, and and even if there were practices that asana practices that were a little softer, if we probably could look into some of the history of some of the softer practices, there was somewhere where there was forcing and striking happening for change. I mean, I just sort of think that in general, there's a lot. I had a teacher, he would say, yoga's fire and yoga's nectar. So it's got to have a little bit of both. If we're all forcing and striking, all self-will, all I can do it, I can set my goals, I can make it happen. Well, that's one avenue, and we're going to run to the end of that road at some point. And if we're like, oh, just like swoon and let it be, there's gonna we're gonna run to the end of that road at some point. So again, we're back to that quality of balance. But the asana practice, to me, it's changed in the way it's been practiced, and even in the time that I've been teaching it and practicing it. That when I came in the door of it, it was hard. I mean, it was just understood that it was hard. And and there weren't a lot of people doing it also, so
yeah, it's hard.
It was really hard. And it wasn't really nurturing, there wasn't
right.
a whole narrative around it about loving yourself. And that just really wasn't it wasn't the narrative. And the narrative has changed a little bit. The expectation of it being, more accessible, more user-friendly, more nurturing. All of those things have come along in even the last decade, and even even to a greater degree in the last 5 years, in my observation. But and I think that that's wonderful, because we need fire and we need nectar. But I think the downside is that many times students are coming to the path and they're not forewarned. Right. Which means they're not forearmed. Like that, people ask me in interviews like this, what would you say to someone who wanted to get started teaching yoga? And I'm kind of an odd yoga teacher. I don't think that everyone should do it.
Absolutely. No, if I didn't have a teacher who I'm working with who really helped me to see all the different flavors of or opportunities that were unfolding in the moment, I'd have hurt myself much more by now, right? Because I'm a guy who wants to push harder. And if it's not hurting, I'm not doing it right.
Right.
And I get the opportunity to practice all different aspects of my being, So that there's the asanas, and then there's the inner dialogue that's happening of how much do I love or hate myself right here in this moment.
Exactly.
Some of the words that I find are present in just about any practice of presence, are words like surrender. I find that trust is, just trust. I could say trust of self, or trust in life, or trust in a flow, but just the word on its own, trust. When I resonate with that, it's like I drop into a space of presence. My meditation has really lent itself to it. And I'm wondering, Christina, are there some words that you're finding as you dialogue more about yoga and you work with yourself and you work with your students, some words that are really at the forefront that are kind of core foundational words that or concepts that really are at the foundation of your yoga practice and your teaching?
Well, I think it comes down to love. It's a big one. That process that you were describing of being faced in an asana, for instance, that you can't do, or some aspect of it that's coming, that's challenging, and entering into that conversation with yourself to observe the tone of it and the tenor of it, and in some ways to lovingly acknowledge that the tenor right now is critical, and many times shortly thereafter the shift can happen towards this could actually be a way to accept myself in my limitation, and that's a very loving thing. So a lot of it, sort of talk down the process. To me, there's a huge process about getting to the quality of love. I think that's also that quality of inner light that I was speaking of, to me, when that feeling of completeness that comes along with practice, and comes along with glimpsing inward to some degree. And then I think in asana practice, we never get really, yoga and the larger yogas, I think we don't get too far away from awareness. and I think that that's the same thing, that it's very easy to get into a preferential relationship around awareness. Like, I'd like to be aware of loving myself right now. Instead, I'm aware of my self-hatred, except that the awareness is the cool thing. Like the awareness is what we're cultivating. We're not actually cultivating the content of awareness only. So that's the thing. If someone says, "Oh, I had a great meditation," was because you thought happy thoughts. You weren't plagued with the things that you were thinking. Or, but it's not. My teacher used to say all the time. It's like there's no good or bad meditation. You sit, whatever arises, arises. If you're aware of it, fantastic. Like the awareness is the thing. The not necessarily what it is. The object of awareness. So I think a relationship with awareness and is a huge thing. That does not require fancy asanas. That does not require fancy clothes. It doesn't require perfectly straight legs or perfectly straight arms. If, for instance, I raise my arm over my head and it's bent, and I know it's bent, I'm in a deeper yogic practice than the flexible person who can raise their arm overhead straight but doesn't really know where their arm is in space. They just have the capacity to put their arm in that position. So, so to me, it's a very interesting kind of point of clarity when we use asana because of that outer form that we're looking at. We get together for those times in let's say a yoga class to work on the forms, and let's do the work of getting your arm straight, for instance. But to me, getting the arm straight is really a fairly meaningless proposition. I mean, like it's just your arm and it's straight or it's bent.
It's just your arm's straight. Okay, great.
Yeah, but if I've traversed some sort of inner territory where I didn't know my arm was actually bent and I didn't know how to straighten it, and I've traversed an inner territory that now I know that it's bent. Now I know what's tight and restricting it. Now I know how to activate what's weak and how to mobilize what's tight. And within a period of time, be it one class or 4 years, my arm goes from an unconscious bent position to a conscious bent position to a consciously straight position. That is the arm reflecting an inner process. It's not that we changed the arm. We integrated something between the ability to be present, aware, and in relationship with the body through and bringing the awareness into the body over time. That is what the yoga is, not the arm being straight.
So the awareness, this is beautiful. The awareness and the love. And when you were speaking to the love, it was resonating with me as an acceptance, an allowance of what is.
You mentioned trust. When I was my spiritual teacher was a man named Lee Loswick, and his spiritual teacher was an Indian saint named Yogi Ram Surat Kumar, and he had has an ashram in southern India in Trivandrum. And I was visiting there after Yogi Ram Surat Kumar had passed, and one of the main women who was his companion and attendants in life was taking us on a tour of the property, and we went to this shrine for this altar that they had set up for Ganesh, and she was explaining to us about Ganesh and the Indian tradition. You probably know, and some people who are listening, many do, but some might not. He's an elephant-headed kind of icon and deity, and he's associated with the first chakra or the foundation of our physicality, but also with the foundation of any project, or he's kind of traditionally invoked at the beginning of things to assure success. And there's all kinds of mythology and all kinds of iconography that goes along with that. But she was explaining some of this, and she said, so we start our days and we do puja, we do prayers to Ganesh, and then we go about our day with the trust and faith that our prayers have been answered. And that everything that happens from that point on is in reference to that we've asked for blessings and we are trusting that the blessings are coming. So even an obstacle placed in our way is an obstacle designed to help us overcome some part of our nature standing in our own way. So, and it's interesting because the first chakra that he's associated with is also about our survival needs, about a sense of trust, about a sense of our needs being met. And so the teaching, there's so many layers of what you're saying is that you really can't embark on much else.
Right.
Unless you're going to have some faith or some trust that your efforts are going to bear some kind of fruit, that there's going to be some value in going forward, that in some way we're fundamentally cared for and fundamentally safe.
Yeah. And that I'm finding that I can now start to not have to put any words after the trust. like
Mm-hmm.
trust in that this is going to happen, or trust that it's all okay, or trust that I'm safe, or it's just trust.
Mm-hmm.
Whew. And it comes with a breath. It comes with a real exhalation of, oh, okay, okay, I can just keep meeting life in trust.
And I think that about the quality of love too, that it's not love.
Mm,
It's like, it's that love has a nature. It doesn't require an object.
yes, yeah. What, Christina? Um, I should think of how to ask this. So I'll ask it initially, see if I want to modify it. But the initial question is kind of like, what do your edges look like these days? And I mean that in regards to like what excites you. What's the outer edge of, I love the idea that that life meets us at the edge of our heart's imagination.
Mhm.
And so what's your heart imagining into, and what are you discovering out there at the edges of your own study and learning and practices that's exciting you these days?
Well, I'm really kind of excited these days about enjoying things. I kind of have
What are
this.
you thinking, Christina?
I have a I have a kind of fantasy about writing some sort of book, or it's kind of a spoof on the self help book of like, good enough is good enough, like the sort of overwhelming push that has populated the self help world of like, maximize this and create your most awesome life, and um, no boundaries and no limits, and all of this sort of like ways that some of the self improvement world has gotten everyone, not everyone, has a lot of people always achieving more in the name of happiness now, instead of like, um, instead of a kind of sober enjoyment of um, of things that are also really great. So I can see like there's this ebb and flow, if we look even historically, of just accept what you've been given. You're lucky to have anything. I'm thinking my parents were raised by folks who survived the Depression, so their sort of kind of thing is like, if you have a job, be grateful. Don't
Right.
ask for time off. Don't ask for more money. They might fire you and you'll have nothing.
Mm. It sounds like kind of the difference between want and need. Like you can, if you feel that you're enough, if you feel that okay, I'm present, I trust, and I don't need more in order to feel enough. But I want. Is that some of what you're talking about?
I think, yeah, I mean, I might use the words even a little bit differently, but
Yeah.
I think there is that quality of where even some of the best ideas and best personal growth philosophies can, in some ways, continue to feed that insatiable, I imagine it inside myself like a hungry ghost, the aspect of inner, of an inner Christina that's just insatiable. Like there'll never be enough, food, clothes, money, acknowledgement, that. And one of the cool things that I'm really happy about in my life right now is that I actually have the direct experiences now of feeling satisfied, of going, oh, I actually have a lot of work that I love to do. I have more work than I can do. So I have wonderful students who respect my offering, and wonderful teachers who are willing to teach me and tell me good job occasionally. So I feel like I'm in a wonderful position of the students that I'm helping feel like they're getting my help, and I have a kind of respect of people underneath me and above me, and that is very fulfilling. And I have enough money. Like I could always spend more, but I have enough money. And I have a great marriage that I really am married to my best friend, and we've been married together almost 20 years, and still have a good time with him, and it's really full. So that to me is kind of the growing edge. To me is to recognize and feel and allow the the greatness that is present in my life. There is so much abundance already that if I go down the road of too much of the current narrative around create your best life, I actually am missing many times I am actually living a pretty great life. And I could just continue to manifest all these other things, but if I don't take time to like let them in, nourish me, fulfill me, let them be enough, then that process but it doesn't really report well. Like it really can't say like, and in 5 years I'll have this, like on a goal setting list, you know?
Well,
Like,
it's actually, I like the idea of in 5 years I may have this and I may not, but that satisfaction comes from within,
right.
not regardless of our conditions, but less attached to the conditions being the provider of our sense of satisfaction.
Right. And I'm in a phase in a cycle of life right now where, there's some really lovely outcomes from work that I've already done. And that there's some of the hard work and the hard visioning and the kind of dedication and has come to some fullness. And what I know about that is that the nature of that time is wonderful, and that there'll be times when whatever I'm having now, things change.
Yes.
And so in a time like this, I can say, oh, yes, my happiness and my joy isn't dependent on those conditions. But a lot of my conditions are met right now. So it's really easy to say.
Well,
I don't know if I'd be so spiritual, in the face of some kind of loss of those things that I was describing that I'm enjoying. And so,
perhaps some of those things are more present in your life because you're not needing them as much and just appreciating that they're there.
And the thing is that I also know is that I know that there's the inner work of it, and
Yes.
I also know that I also believe in that when the outer world reflects certain things back to us and we can let it in, it's very healing. So I have the good fortune, like I was saying, of having some very wonderful students who are very keen to share in the things that I'm sharing with them, and really I get this wonderful reflection back from my students. That's very meaningful to me, and that's a great good fortune. And so I have a great opportunity right now to study with some wonderful teachers, and have had studied with some wonderful teachers. I have a lot of love for myself, let's say, but I also have a mate who thinks I'm great, So I think when those two things come together, ultimately, I think, yes, we really can do a lot of the work interiorly. And I really do know that when I've had the periods in my life where the world smiles back at me, it can be very healing, because there's the inner work of no one can love you until you love yourself, kind of thing. But then there's the other reality for me, which has been that people have helped me love myself before I could, and I'm a big fan that there's of those two avenues informing one another, kind of like earlier, the inner and the outer teacher. They're really essentially not anything different, and yet at different times serve different functions in our own healing and understanding.
Well, I got to say, Christina, not that you need it, but I'm smiling back at you right now.
That's sweet.
I really appreciate the conversation. I wish that we just had, days and days to continue it, but we don't.
We've got to end now.
We have to end now. Right, exactly. And it may end messy and it may end incomplete, but our time is up. Christina, I've so enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thanks so much for inviting me to be on your show. And I would say that I am was so excited to get your email just because of the name. I really talk about signal and noise a lot in my conversations with my students and my conversations with my husband about what brings our life meaning is really that whole understanding where the signal is and what things keep the signal strong. So I've thought it's a really awesome title for your program.
Thank you. And I felt there was such synergy.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Be well. Go catch your train.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. To learn more about Christina Sell and to read her blogs, learn about her workshops, and to access her extensive online collection of classes, webinars, and teachings, visit livethelightofyoga.com. To work with me for personal or leadership development and mindfulness and presence guidance, or to attend a workshop or international retreat, visit chessedwards.com. You can listen to this episode again and to all of our interviews on iTunes and at our website, beyondthenoisepodcast.com. I'm Chess Edwards, and this is Beyond the Noise, conversations at the heart of modern-day living.